the ocean stretched forever, a black horizon under a cold moon. And in that silence, a giant lay still. 5,000 sailors held their breath. The carrier, built to rule the seas, was drifting. Engine silent, power gone. On the bridge, alarms pulsed like red eyes. Radios crackled with questions, no answers. In Combat Information Center, operators whispered. Radar sweeps closing in. Unidentified, 200 miles out. Below, in the belly of steel, heat bled from reactors. Pipes groaned under strain. Every second dragged like a sentence waiting to fall. And then, a hatch creaked open. A shadow stepped inside. Not a commander, not a scientist. An old man with a canvas bag. And that's where the story begins. The Pacific night pressed down heavy. USS Resolute, pride of the fleet, floated dead in the water. No power from her reactors, only the dull red glow of emergency lights. In the engine room, sweat dripped down faces. Monitors repeated the same verdict. Primary propulsion failure. Restart denied. Above, 5,000 sailors waited, chained to a silent heart of steel. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Ward clutched the console. 48 hours of failure ground into his chest like iron. They had tried everything. Emergency coolant flush at 0300 hours. Manual fuel rod alignment. Even a risky voltage spike to shock the system awake. The reactor refused to respond. Ward barked at his team, his voice sharp. Run it again. Diagnostics full sweep. But the screens only blinked back the same words. Primary propulsion failure. Restart denied. His engineers avoided his eyes. They had followed the manuals to the letter. Still, the carrier was a corpse on the sea. A petty officer muttered, too loud in the tense quiet. If they spot us like this, we won't last 10 minutes. Ward heard it. Everyone did. The silence that followed cut sharper than alarms. And then, metal squealed. A hatch opened. Boots stepped onto the deck. Slow and steady. An old man entered the chamber. Grease-stained overalls, navy faded by years. White hair catching the red light. In his hand, a battered canvas bag. Ward's jaw hardened. Who cleared a civilian in here? Nervous laughter rippled among the younger engineers. The absurdity broke tension for a heartbeat. But the old man didn't answer. His eyes drifted past them to the dark turbines. He touched the casing like greeting an old friend. Silence thickened again. Rear Admiral Jonathan Pike followed him inside. I did, Pike said simply. Every head snapped toward him. Ward spun, furious. With respect, Admiral, this is a restricted zone. We're sitting on a nuclear core. We don't need tourists. He jabbed a finger toward the stranger. Not a tourist, Pike replied. Master Chief Samuel Riker. Here at my request. The words rippled through the room. The laughter died. Ward sneered. A retired machinist? 70. Maybe older. Admiral, this is a warship, not a retirement home. The room shifted uncomfortably. Riker still hadn't spoken. He stepped forward, palm flat against the steel skin of the reactor housing. Gentle, almost reverent. Ward scoffed. Listening to metal now? Going to whisper it back to life. But no one laughed this time. A junior sailor studied the old man's eyes. They weren't cloudy with age. They were sharp, focused, scanning the chamber like a battlefield. Riker crouched by a coolant junction. From his bag he drew a machinist's stethoscope. Rubber cracked. Metal dulled. The tool looked ancient in the sterile glow of digital screens. One engineer whispered, "Is this a joke?" But none dared laugh aloud. Riker pressed the scope to the auxiliary line, eyes closing in stillness. Seconds stretched. Then his brow tightened. A flicker crossed his face. Memory. Surfacing. In his mind, the engine room dissolved. North Atlantic, 1972. USS Scorpion, 3 days before she vanished. He was a young machinist's mate, pressed against a bulkhead during a storm. He'd heard it then. A faint, discordant hum in the auxiliary cooling line. He reported it. The chief dismissed him. Diagnostics are clean, kid. 2 weeks later, Scorpion was gone. 99 men lost. The sound was identical. Riker's eyes snapped open. The memory burned, but his voice stayed steady. Auxiliary coolant line. Blocked. His voice carried in the hush. Ward erupted. Impossible! That system was decommissioned in the 90s. Diagnostics show clean. He slapped the nearest monitor for emphasis. Riker ignored him, addressing Pike. During retrofit, the line wasn't fully isolated. Tag AUXRLX07 was dropped from live telemetry. Sampling stayed at 1 Hz for dock tests only. He tapped the pipe once. Underway. It's invisible. Pressure built slowly, undetected. A young engineer pulled up schematics on his tablet. Lines of code and piping glowed. His face drained pale. He's right, the junior said. The old auxiliary line still loops into the primary. If it's blocked, it strangles the whole flow. The words landed like a hammer. Ward stammered. Even if true, there's no proof. But nobody looked at him anymore. They looked at the old man. Riker straightened slowly. There's a valve you've forgotten, built during the Cold War, part of the old emergency coolant bypass. Pike's brow furrowed. I thought those systems were decommissioned. Decommissioned, Riker said quietly. Not removed. The words hung heavy in the air. The alarms still pulsed red. And for the first time in 2 days, there was more than fear in the room. There was a question no one could afford to ignore. Samuel Riker's hands were steady as he worked. But inside, ghosts pressed close. The memory of another ship. Another silence. 1972. USS Scorpion. He was 23 years old, fresh out of training, convinced he'd heard something wrong in the pipes. The chief machinist had laughed at him. The computer says we're fine, kid. Trust the machine. 3 days later, Riker transferred off. 2 weeks after that, Scorpion never surfaced. 99 souls, gone. He'd carried that weight for 50 years. The sound of that valve, that faint discordant hum, had haunted every engine room he'd ever entered. It was why he became obsessed. Why he learned to hear what machines whispered when sensors stayed blind. And why, eventually, he couldn't bear it anymore and walked away. Now, crouched in the belly of the Resolute, he heard it again. History, repeating. Petty Officer Olivia Chen stood at her console, watching. She was young, sharp, the kind of sailor who noticed things others missed. And she noticed that Riker wasn't guessing. His movements were deliberate. His fingers traced pipes with the confidence of memory, not exploration. This wasn't superstition. This was knowledge carved into bone. Chen's mind raced. She'd read something once, in an old manual archived in the ship's digital library. A technical memo dated 1974. Author, SM-1 Samuel Riker. Her father had been Navy, old school, and he used to tell stories. There was a man, he'd said, who could hear a ship's soul. They called him the Whisperer. Her father had served on USS Georgia in 1985, survived a near meltdown because of one enlisted man's intuition. Chen had thought it was myth. Now the myth stood 10 feet away, stethoscope pressed to metal. She opened a secure panel, typing fast. Critical. Admiral Pike brought Samuel Riker on board. Ward resisting. Morale failing. Engines dead. Possible legacy fault in AUXRLX07. She routed it straight to Norfolk. Highest clearance. Ward caught her glance and snapped. Stay on task, Petty Officer. Chen nodded quickly, hiding the transmission. But her heart raced. If Riker was right, they needed backup fast. Riker found the junction buried in the maze of coolant lines. A hatch crusted with rust. Bolts frozen by decades of corrosion. He pried it open with effort. Inside lay a relief valve, forgotten by time. Ward scoffed. That valve's redundant. Diagnostics don't even track it anymore. Riker replied calmly. Redundant doesn't mean useless. It means last resort. He set the stethoscope against the housing. A faint vibration thrummed through the metal, irregular and sickly, like a heartbeat struggling against a blockage. Riker closed his eyes. Not in prayer. In recognition. The sound matched perfectly. Scorpion. 1972. The valve that killed 99 men was choking another ship. He drew a slow breath and opened his eyes. It's stuck, he said quietly. She can't breathe. His words barely carried, but every ear caught them. Ward's face flushed. That system's been inactive for 30 years. Riker looked at him for the first time. His voice was soft, but it cut. Then why is there pressure behind it? The room went silent. Admiral Pike stepped forward. Explain. Riker tapped the valve casing with one knuckle. When they modernized the reactor systems in the 90s, they bypassed the old auxiliary coolant. But they didn't fully isolate it. He pointed to a junction above. Tag AUXRLX07 was dropped from the telemetry dashboard. Sampling stayed at 1 Hz, dockside only. Underway, the system's invisible. One of the junior engineers pulled up a schematic on his tablet. His eyes went wide. He's right. The auxiliary line still connects to the primary loop. If it's blocked, it chokes the whole system. Riker finished. Like a clot in an artery. Ward opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Riker's wrench slipped from the bag with a metallic clink. It was old, edges worn smooth by decades of use. He braced himself, fitting it onto the stubborn bolt. Ward stepped forward. "Stop. If you break that housing, we could flood the compartment." But Pike's hand shot up. "Let him work." Riker's arm trembled with effort. Not from weakness. From concentration. The bolt resisted. Decades of corrosion fighting him. Then it gave. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber. A hiss of pent-up steam escaped, ghostly white against the red alarms. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Nobody breathed. Riker leaned back, sweat beading on his brow. "That's what was choking her," he said softly. "Now she's got a chance." Ward shook his head violently. The readouts still show nominal pressure across all systems. He pointed at the glowing panels as proof. But Chen, watching from her console, saw it. The auxiliary pressure readings, previously flatlined, were moving. Just barely. But moving. Her stomach tightened. She sent another burst transmission. Riker identified fault in legacy. AUXRLX07 valve. Blockage cleared. Possible restart viable. Ward obstructing. Miles away, in a Pentagon conference room, Fleet Admiral Marcus Donovan's secure tablet buzzed. He glanced down at the alert. His face went pale. Samuel Riker. Donovan's mind flashed back. 1985. USS Georgia. He was a lieutenant, barely 30, when the reactor coolant system failed during a storm off Iceland. The chief engineer was dead. The XO was panicking. And then, an enlisted man, a master chief, machinist's mate, had appeared. Riker. He'd found a fracture in a secondary pump no one else had thought to check. Fixed it with a wrench and steady hands, while the ship pitched in 12-meter swells. Saved 300 lives. Donovan had never forgotten. The debt had followed him through 40 years of service. Now, the same man was fighting to save another ship. Donovan stood abruptly. "Excuse me," he muttered to the Joint Chiefs. They stared as he walked out without explanation. His aides scrambled to follow. "Get me a bird," Donovan barked. "Now. Pull one off the president's lawn if you have to." Back in the engine room, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Riker stood slowly, stethoscope hanging in his hand. "We can try her now," he said quietly. Ward's jaw clenched. He wanted to object, to scream, to drag the old man out. But the crew's eyes were no longer with him. They were watching Riker, and in their faces, Ward saw something he couldn't fight. Belief. Combat Information Center pinged again. Operators stared at their scopes. Unidentified radar sweep, bearing 090, range 200 nautical miles, track closing. The report hit Admiral Pike like a blow. They weren't just broken. They were exposed. Down in the engine room, tension thickened. Everyone knew what the contact meant. Time was running out. Lieutenant Commander Ward paced, jaw tight. Not the furious barking of before. Something sharper. He was digging for survival. His fingers flew over a tablet. Old records, archives, maintenance notes. And then he found it. A memo. Dated November 1974. Author. SM1 Samuel Riker. Subject. Recommendation for auxiliary coolant system isolation. Ward's eyes narrowed as he read. The legacy auxiliary coolant valves in the new reactor-class vessels present a long-term failure risk. Tag AU-XR-LX07 should be fully isolated and removed during next overhaul cycle. Failure to address may result in catastrophic blockage. The response, stamped 2 weeks later, rejected. Systems deemed redundant but functional. Removal not cost-effective. Ward's blood ran cold. Riker had warned them, 50 years ago. A horrible thought crept into his mind. What if he let this happen? What if he knew the valve would fail? So he could come back and play hero. It was paranoid. Insane. But Ward was desperate. His authority crumbling. He stormed forward. "Admiral Pike, look at this." He thrust the tablet toward him. Pike scanned the document quickly. Riker's name was right there. The warning ignored half a century ago. Ward's voice rose, sharp with suspicion. "Convenient, isn't it? He writes this memo, gets dismissed. 50 years later, he's the only one who can fix it." The crew froze. For the first time, Their doubt turned not on Ward, but on Riker. Eyes shifted. Riker straightened slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes carried weight. Pain. Old and deep. "You think I sabotaged this ship?" Riker's voice was quiet. Ward's jaw set. "I think you wanted to be right. And maybe you made sure you would be." For a moment, no one moved. Then Riker laughed. Not mockery. Bitterness. "You're half right, Lieutenant Commander." He stepped forward, meeting Ward's glare without flinching. "I did want to be right. 50 years ago, I wanted someone to listen to me." His voice cracked slightly. "I wanted them to believe me when I said Scorpion was dying." The room held its breath. 99 men, Ward. 99 sailors I sailed with, ate with, laughed with. Riker's hands trembled. "I heard the problem. I reported it. And they told me the computers said everything was fine." He took a shuddering breath. 2 weeks later, they were all dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. Riker's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "So yes, I wanted to be right. I wrote that memo. I begged them to fix it." He looked at Ward, eyes blazing. "Not so I could be a hero. So I'd never have to hear that sound again." Ward felt the floor shift beneath him. This wasn't sabotage. This was guilt. 50 years of it. Admiral Pike spoke, his voice firm. "That's enough. We restart. Now." The chief technician hesitated. "Sir, if this doesn't work, then we're no worse off than we are now," Pike said. "Initiate the sequence." Fingers danced over the console. The reset began, a low hum spreading through the steel. The deck vibrated faintly, like a giant stirring from sleep. Ward watched the readouts, heart pounding. Voltage levels climbed. Coolant flow increased. But then, alarms shrieked. Temperature spiked red across the board. "Coolant flow collapsing," someone shouted. Ward lunged forward. "Abort! We're overheating." But Riker was already moving. He lunged for the valve, wrench in hand. "She's fighting the blockage. I need to adjust the flow." "You'll blow the system," Ward yelled. Riker didn't answer. He cranked the valve counterclockwise, veins standing out on his forearms. Steam hissed violently, scalding hot. The temperature gauge climbed higher. 900 degrees. 950. 1,000. The crew backed away, fear etched on their faces. Riker grunted, muscles straining. "Come on, girl. Come on." 1,050 degrees. Ward's hand hovered over the emergency shutdown. Another 30 seconds and she's gone. Then, suddenly, the flow changed. A deep rumble rolled through the chamber, different from before. Stronger. Steadier. The temperature began to drop. 1,950. 900. Gauges that had been screaming red shifted to amber, then yellow, then green. The turbines roared to life, a sound like thunder in the belly of the ship. The lights flickered, then surged bright and steady. The Resolute was alive. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the cheers erupted, raw and uncontrollable. Men clapped each other's backs, shouting over the roar. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Ward stood frozen, pale as death. The old man had done what he could not. Riker sagged against the bulkhead, chest heaving. His hands trembled as he set down the wrench. Chen's console pinged urgently. Message. Fleet Admiral Donovan inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Her breath caught. She looked across the room at Riker, who had no idea what was coming. Ward saw the message too. His stomach twisted. Fleet Admiral. Here. He crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of Riker. The old man looked up, exhausted. Ward's voice came out hoarse. "I'm sorry." He swallowed hard. "I signed the patch that stripped AUXRL-X07 from telemetry 3 years ago. I killed the alarm before it ever sounded. That's on me." The admission stunned the room. For once, Ward wasn't defensive. He was simply honest. Riker studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Just once. You weren't the first to trust machines too much. Won't be the last." He paused. "What matters is what you do next." Before Ward could respond, the hatch burst open. A presence filled the room before a word was spoken. Fleet Admiral Marcus Donovan stepped inside. His uniform was immaculate, his eyes sharp as blades. The entire room snapped to attention. Donovan's gaze swept the chamber. The humming engines, the jubilant sailors. The old man leaning against the wall, his eyes locked on Riker. The room held its breath. Then Donovan's face broke into something rare, a smile, How long has it been, Master Chief? His voice was warm, carrying decades of respect. Riker's lips curved faintly. Too long, Admiral, too long. Donovan crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't salute. He extended his hand. Riker looked at it for a moment, then shook it. The grip was firm, carrying the weight of shared history. Ward watched, stunned. The Admiral knew him. Donovan turned to address the crew, voice ringing. Listen well. You stand in the presence of a legend. He gestured to Riker. 1985. USS Georgia. Lieutenant Donovan here. He tapped his chest. Would have died in a reactor meltdown off Iceland, if not for this man. The crew listened, transfixed. 1978. USS Enterprise. A coolant leak that could have irradiated half the Atlantic Fleet. Master Chief Riker found it when every computer said the system was clean. Donovan's voice grew quieter, more intense. And in 1972, he tried to save the Scorpion. He heard her dying, and no one would listen. The weight of those words settled over the room. Donovan looked at Riker. You've saved more ships than history bothered to record. And today, you did it again. Riker's voice was rough. I just didn't want to lose another one, sir. Donovan nodded slowly. Then he did something that made every sailor's jaw drop. The fleet admiral saluted. Sharp. Formal. Respectful. And Samuel Riker, retired Master Chief, returned it. In that moment, the legend became real. The turbines thundered steady. A heartbeat restored. The USS Resolute cut through the Pacific once more. Alive and powerful. Above deck, sailors felt the rhythm beneath their boots and knew they'd witnessed something rare. In the engine room, the crew worked with renewed purpose, but they kept glancing at the old man, committing his face to memory. Riker packed his tools slowly, carefully. Each instrument returned to its place in the worn canvas bag. The stethoscope last, nestled in its cradle of old cloth. Petty Officer Chen approached hesitantly. Master Chief. Riker looked up, eyebrows raised. She held out a small notebook, hands trembling slightly. My father served under you. USS Georgia. 1985. Petty Officer First Class David Chen. Her voice caught. He told me stories. I thought they were exaggerated. Riker's expression softened. A smile flickered across his weathered face. David. Good man. Steady hands. He paused. He made it home. Yes, sir. Because of you. Riker reached into his bag and pulled out the stethoscope. He held it out to her. Master Chief. I can't. Machines always tell the truth, Riker said quietly. People lie. Politicians lie. Even computers lie sometimes, when we program them to ignore what matters. He pressed it into her hands. But machines? They only know how to be honest. Learn to hear them. Chen's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, sir. She stepped back, clutching the tool like a sacred relic. Ward appeared from the shadows. He'd been standing there, working up courage. Master Chief. Riker turned, studying the younger man. Ward's voice was rough. How do you trust yourself when the sensors say one thing and you hear another? Riker was quiet for a long moment. I don't always know, Lieutenant Commander. He met Ward's eyes. Sometimes I'm terrified, I'm wrong. That I'll give advice and people will die because I was too arrogant to admit I'm just guessing. Ward blinked, surprised. But here's what I learned. Riker continued. Fear is good. Fear means you understand the stakes. It's when you stop being afraid that you become dangerous. He gripped Ward's shoulder. You'll be fine. You care about this crew. That's half the battle. Ward nodded slowly, something settling inside him. I'm sorry, I don't. Riker's voice was firm but kind. You were protecting your people. Never apologize for that. They stood together for a moment, the turbines roaring around them. Then Ward stepped back and saluted. Riker returned it, crisp and precise. Admiral Donovan waited near the hatch. When Riker approached, the Admiral smiled. The debt from 85 still stands, you know. Riker chuckled. You already paid it, Admiral. You gave me this chance. Donovan shook his head. Not even close. They walked together through the corridors. Sailors lined the passage, standing at attention. Not because they were ordered to, because they wanted to. Riker walked slowly, meeting their eyes, acknowledging each one. On the flight deck, sunset burned orange across the horizon. Waves glittered gold. The helicopter's rotors spun up, slicing the air with rhythmic thunder. Riker paused at the door, 1 foot on the step. He turned back, looking across the assembled crew, hundreds of faces watching him. Young and old, officers and enlisted, all of them changed by what they'd witnessed. He raised one hand. Not a wave, a salute. And as one, the crew returned it. The helicopter lifted, rising into the crimson sky. Riker's figure shrank against the sun, then disappeared into the light. That night, Admiral Pike stood alone on the bridge. He looked at a photograph pinned to the wall. Legendary figures of naval engineering. Hyman Rickover, Grace Hopper. And in the corner, a younger Samuel Riker. Some legends, Pike murmured, don't fade. They return when we need them most. Below, in the engine room, Chen pressed the stethoscope to a pipe. She closed her eyes, listening, learning. Ward supervised his team with new patience. When a junior engineer questioned a reading, Ward didn't snap. He listened, and deep in the steel heart of the ship, the turbines sang. A steady rhythm, strong and true, the sound of a machine that had been heard. In every engine room across the fleet, the story would spread. The tale of an old man who could hear what others could not. The engine whisperer, not a myth. A reminder that sometimes the most advanced sensor in the world is the human soul, paying attention,